Trish Gleason with the World Wellness Show, and today we have with us Dr. Douglas Becker. Hi, doctor. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Great. Today, Dr. Becker is going to be talking to us about indigenous medicine and how it can help us with longevity. So we're very excited to hear some of his 30-year experiences in helping others around the world. So today, I'd like you to go ahead and maybe add a few other things that you have to say about your background and tell us about your new book. How about that?
Well, my new book, Billionaire Health Secrets, is a little bit not exactly as a lot of people would think. When they look at Billionaire Health Secrets, a lot of times they're thinking special substances, special supplements, special exercises. My brother is a billionaire, and I've watched him over the years through the lens of indigenous medicine, and I've seen how he's incorporated a lot of basic fundamental principles for longevity and health that we teach about in indigenous medicine. And so these are more like principles and values. Yeah, so we have like self-reliance, honesty, humor, courage, and family. And so these things aren't usually thought of as ingredients for long life. But in indigenous medicine, which is coming out of a very different kind of worldview and cosmology, it was understood how our emotional connection with each other and how our experience in those relationships really helped to feed and be used by our bodies as a resource. And so that's what the book is about. A lot of personal, kind of unusual stories about myself and my brothers and family. Yeah, so that's
Wow,
what it's
great.
about.
That's great. Now, tell us, where have you studied? Tell us a little bit about that and your background in that
Yeah.
area.
So I was in the university for about 10 years, and I studied music, biology, and architecture. And during those times, I also studied different healing arts that were connected in those fields, like sound healing, bioresonance, things like this. And towards the end of that, I started studying Ayurveda. And after completing a short course on Ayurveda, about 500 hours, I went back into more chemistry biology with what's called biotrain assessment. And this is where we take urine and saliva and we measure a lot of physiological parameters and some chemical analysis of urine, and we look at it to receive different measurements about where the body is, and then we actually suggest certain supplements that are really specific for the chemistry of the body. And in some of the advanced studies, I actually saw these parallels with Ayurveda that I had never heard before, and still even to this day I don't hear anyone talking about these. And so I went back into studying more indigenous medicine, and that was through the lens of Tibetan medicine. So I completed a few programs with the Sorg Kong Institute, which is one of the biggest proponents of Tibetan medicine today in the world, and Tibetan medicine education, which is a long-founded traditional Tibetan medicine education center out of Switzerland and Italy. And I also spent time with indigenous elders from Native American tradition in the North America and South America, and ended up living in Ecuador for 3 years, lived in New Zealand for a year, and then lived in Asia for about 3 years. And during this time, I studied and got a lot of, firsthand experience with how the traditional systems were really addressing things. That's my experience with studying.
Well, you certainly got the background, and we're excited to get down to the bottom line, what we can do to live longer, because we all want to live longer. So can you give us just, well, first of all, can you tell us the difference between you, the people that are biohacking, not that biohacking is bad, we're just comparing. What's the difference between conventional medicine and what you have to offer?
Sure. So one of the things that is happened, even with herbal medicine, and even with a lot of practice with biohacking and all these things, is that we're looking at the body as like a single kind of solution, like in a beaker, for instance, and that if we add different components in that, then will establish and create some effect that's really really positive. So the reality is that the body is always changing. Yeah, it's always moving, it's always responding, it's always compensating. And when we actually push the system through, through the power of reductionism, we've been able to isolate and identify a lot of amazing components in the chemistry in the body. Yet still, there's certain things that happen with the body that modern medicine has a hard time putting its finger on, such as when you have a sympathetic nervous system dominance. The body can actually override the chemistry, or the nervous system, possibly you could say, is overriding the chemistry, where you're trying to put someone to sleep and calm them down, and the things that you're giving them that should affect the chemistry in a certain way is actually uh, manifesting with keeping the person awake and anxious, and vice versa, with taking things to actually wake the person up and get them motivated and to do stuff. A lot of times we'll put them to sleep. And so this phenomenon is not really understood too much in modern medicine. And when we look at, for instance, a blood test, a blood test is actually showing us the result of compensation in the body. It's the last tissue to actually really change too much. If it changes too much, we're dead. And so the body can pull protein out of the brain, out of the lungs, to keep the blood just right, and pull all kinds of different things in order to keep the levels just right. And it can also reject certain things in order to keep certain levels right. So when we look at what's happening in the blood, oftentimes we'll have a situation where someone's ill, but their blood looks normal, and it's because it hasn't really reached that level yet. And in the same way, when we look at a certain level or amount of a particular component, oftentimes what we're looking at is solely the result of compensation. So we can't really say that because it's low in the blood that the body doesn't actually have enough of it, which is generally the approach. And so, when we don't take into consideration the effect of stress on the entire system and how it affects the body's ability to compensate, we actually aren't getting a full picture. And as well, when we're not looking at the strength of the digestion or the diet, we're actually also not getting a really accurate picture if we just look at the blood test. So the difference between what I do and, say, like what indigenous traditions do, is because we didn't really have access to reductionism. We didn't have access to the microscope. Perhaps there was some mystical ways of seeing deeper into the system, but because we weren't really focused on the very fundamental particles and molecules and the chemistry in that way, what we were looking at more is systems and how we could affect the systems and support the body to come back into balance. And so because of that, digestion was considered to be super important. In fact, in traditional systems, they felt if you couldn't fix the digestion, you can't really call yourself a doctor. Even if you could, like, cut the arm off and put a new arm on and sew it on, all these amazing things that we do nowadays with medicine, traditionally, a lot of the medical practices wouldn't really be considered to be totally medicine, because we're not fixing the digestion. And so there's two components really. One is fixing the digestion, and the other is understanding stress and how it affects the system, and understanding how to create integration of stress, so that, in modern terms, you could say, so that our neural networks healthfully grow, and as we get older, we become more able to respond to stress in a more healthy way, without really building up pressure and a lot of disturbance in our system, rather than just masking stress. So nowadays, as people get older and they experience the stress of getting older, what normally happens is that there's different substances people are using to take the edge off. Usually in our culture, it's been alcohol. But of course, there's all sorts of drugs available, um, both pharmaceutical and conventional drugs. And so we're not really approaching longevity and aging from a perspective of making ourselves resilient, from a perspective of our kind of neural network being more able to respond to the stress. As we get older, we just experience more and more higher and higher levels of stress. And if we have practices, or, religion isn't too popular anymore, churches aren't really popular anymore. A lot of these um, kind of conventions that we had to support us, we're turning away from, unfortunately. And a lot of these things that build more relationship outside of just survival for life really help us, really help us to feel what we're experiencing without having it disable our body. And that's a huge part of traditional medicine, is the ability to actually feel. Like the emotions that we have actually are going through the same channels that information is sent, in order for our bodies to respond properly to our environment, externally and also internally. Are you there?
Wow, yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, that's all
So
right.
I am just shocked at some of the information you're providing. So number one, let's recap. So when we get our blood tests, it's almost too late. I mean, it's not too
Well,
late, but it's not a good
it
deal.
shows that things have been awry for a long time.
Oh
And
my,
and this is why a lot of people who are sick, they go in and their blood looks normal. The like basically the now not a lot of things are changing a little bit in response to this. For instance, they used to only look at hormones through the blood. Now they're starting to look at it in saliva. There's been a lot of incredible cutting edge science for the last 15 years based on looking at urine and saliva. And in fact, the original the original symbol for medicine in Greek medicine was a jar with urine in it.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and that, so the urine can show a lot. So can the saliva. Before the blood, the blood is really delicate, and so yeah, it's compensating for a lot. And if we look at it more from the position of compensation, then we can see that there will naturally be different levels than we would expect based on what the body needs. I'll give you an example. If you have a blood sugar issue, then your level of vitamin D is actually going to show lower than normal. Even though the vitamin D might be there, the body is actually kind of rejecting vitamin D, you could say, because of what the undigested carbohydrates are doing in order to pull calcium into the blood. They're actually serving the function in a lot of ways of one of the main functions of vitamin D. And so the body naturally can reject or ignore the vitamin D. And so if we're looking in a blood level and we see low vitamin D level, if we're not considering the blood sugar and we just start pumping the body with more vitamin D, many people have suggested that this is putting an incredible load on the parathyroid, and could it possibly create thyroid issues. Um, or for instance, so everything that's happening in our system is being compensated for. There's things that we need, and there's things that we don't need. And the thing about it is, I think it was about 20 years ago, almost 15, maybe 15 years ago, they identified three genetic markers for the three different constitutions that have been talked about in Ayurveda. But two of them are, pretty well known. One is having a systemic catabolic system. Systemic, basically, it's a difficulty in responding to oxidation in the body. Some people are just genetically predisposed to that. And then some people are genetically predisposed to having a difficulty responding to an anaerobic anabolic dominance in the system. So what you find is that you have certain chemistries that are different in people. Some people, you could say, are more fiery, more driven, more kind of push themselves to the front, and the first to speak, the first to act. They're kind of confrontational. In a traditional sense, we could say these people are really fiery. And then another kind of person is they're more soft, they're more gentle, and they tend to be more off than on. Like the fiery people are really on, and the anabolic people are really off. So these genetic dispositions, they make it so that certain things wouldn't really be supportive for our system. For instance, if I'm a really fiery person, I'm going to have a hard time going to sleep at night, and I'll tend to have looser stools. If I go out into the sun for a short time, I'm going to feel kind of uncomfortable. Yeah, in fact, I'll be more susceptible to sunstroke even. So for me, things like vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, sulfur-based drugs and supplements, essential fatty acids, all these things are actually going to aggravate my condition. Yeah. And so the other on the other side, if I have a hard time getting up in the morning, and I don't I can't really turn on and get motivated, it's very difficult for me to do that. Taking antioxidants would actually make that situation worse, and in theory could even create such a strong anaerobic situation in the body that I might start to grow tumors. Okay, so I'll give you a great example of how we address this. I had a woman, and she came to me, and she wanted my help, and she really reluctantly showed me her arm. And all along the back of her arm, she had about dime-sized tumors growing, growths on her arm. And this had been going on for several months. They'd been growing and spreading, and she was really concerned and really, she was very kind of shy about it. She was embarrassed. And I asked her if she was constipated, because to have an anaerobic situation where you're growing growths, a lot of times you'll see constipation with that. You won't see diarrhea. You'll see on the other side. So she said she wasn't. And then I asked her, well, okay, well, how many times a day do you go to the bathroom? And she said, I go to the bathroom about once every 6 days. And I was like, okay, so you are constipated. That's not normal. And so I said, why don't you do this? Relax first. Let's just see how this works. Take 3 tablespoons of olive oil in the morning, and then let me know how you feel in about 3 days. So she came back in 3 days and showed me her arm, and all the growths were completely gone. That's how powerful the chemistry can be changed. Now this is consistent with tradition.